Each of us has different things we're passionate about. And maybe you're passionate about music or cheer or gaming or Pokemon. Okay, maybe not Pokemon, maybe that's your younger brother or sister, or maybe me. But we're passionate about things. And no matter our interests, there are things we will talk on and on about, or rewatch, or redo, or maybe revisit. But there are also things that we as a society seem to be getting increasingly dispassionate about. There are overwhelming atrocities that we become desensitized to because it just seems to be like one bad thing keeps happening after another. Like we hear someone else has been kidnapped, or another person was abused, or maybe people were injured in a mass tragedy. And for the past few weeks we've been talking about injustices. And we know events and experiences like those aren't fair or just. And in theory we wish somebody somewhere would shift those situations from bad to good. But when we begin to think of all the injustices in the world, or even just all the injustices we've been talking about, it can really feel overwhelming. So we just disengage and try not to think about it, and we just think about self-preservation. And questions like, what should I do, or what can I do, can become like too much to think about. And after all, what is something that will actually make a difference when it comes to injustice? Like, just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's just define the word injustice once more. Well, when you hear people talking about justice, it simply means something that is right, fair or equal. Well, injustice is just the opposite of that. When we talk about injustice, we're talking about the things in the world that are unfair, unequal and not right. People getting bullied out of school, that's injustice. Victims of human trafficking, that's injustice. Families in poverty, that's injustice. Students not having the tools or the resources or internet access that prevents them from keeping up in class, well, that's injustice. Women not being paid the same as men for the exact same job, that's an injustice. Or people being treated differently and being discriminated against, that's injustice. And the list goes on, and when you think about it this way, chances are you can see plenty of areas of injustice in our world. And if you're honest, that probably makes you think something like, oh man, like there's a lot of terrible things happening in this world. Like somebody should really do something about it. And so far we all agree. We all get that, and there's a need for more somebodies to do some things. But I want you to pay attention to what I'm about to say next, because it's the whole point of this series. And it could be a phrase that passes right through your mind and having no effect. Or it could be the change of the course of your life. So here we go. This is it. You are somebody who could do something. Like you are somebody who could do something. You have the ability to do good in the world filled with lots and lots of bad. And maybe you have done something, maybe you brought some good in spite of some really bad situations. But then the realization hits that it's not just one and done battle. So many people, including some of you and some of your leaders, have spent years fighting against things like racism and poverty and prejudice and gender inequality. And you know this work isn't easy or fast, and that everyone who is ready to do something has to be ready to do it for the long haul. But you could also feel overwhelmed and apathetic, and because you realise that it's emotionally and mentally and even spiritually exhausting to deal with and fight against the long list of injustices happening in our world. And as much as we talk and pray about it and do something about injustice, the reality is that to you it truly feels like a problem that just can't be solved. Maybe you're thinking that injustice has happened always, and it's always happening, it's still happening, so there's really no hope of it ever changing. Maybe you're wondering how you, just one person, can make a difference in such a huge problem like racism or human trafficking or sexism or poverty or others. Is it even possible for one teenager to make a difference in any meaningful way? And maybe you're so tired of talking about it and trying to explain to people who don't seem to care that you wonder if it's even worth trying anymore, and will people even care as much as you do? Maybe you've experienced injustice for so long that you wonder if saying anything or doing anything is really going to make a difference. Like, it hasn't so far, so why would it now? Is there any way all this bad can become something good? And believe me, I totally get this isn't easy, and it's overwhelming. It's something that feels like somebody bigger or stronger or older or more powerful should be doing, and it feels like somebody somewhere needs to do some good, right? Well, remember what we said. You could be that somebody. And to get started, we're going to look at some of the words by a guy named James. And what's interesting about James is that he was actually the brother of Jesus. And can you imagine growing up in the same family as Jesus? Like, it could have helped that Jesus is literally God in human form. For those of you who have been siblings, you can probably feel for James right now. Like what's really interesting is that Jesus died and was raised back to life, and James got more involved in the ministry of his brother. And James went from being mostly absent from Jesus' ministry to being the guy traveling around the world telling others about his brother. Like, what changed? Well, my guess is when your brother dies and comes back to life, it makes sense to believe that he is who he said he is. And James believed that his brother, Jesus, was actually the Son of God. And this is one of the reasons we know the resurrection actually happened, because Jesus' own brother believed he died and came back to life. And James wrote down the experiences he had after watching all of this happen. And Jesus went on to write a letter to a group of Christians who were facing severe injustice. And he challenged them by saying this: suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? When you put it that way, it sounds pretty heartless. But you know what? If we're honest, I think that's what we're all tempted to do sometimes. When faced with the hugeness of the problem that we don't know how to solve, we often just settle for saying or posting something and doing nothing. When we see something unjust happening in our town, we think about how bad it is. We may even say so, but sometimes that's the end of our involvement. When we see someone who we know struggling to have their needs met, we might say we'll pray for them, and we probably do, but of course we don't want to get all up in their business, so it stops there. We don't do much else. When we see racial injustice happening in our country, we might post about it on social media feeds, but then we move on. And so many of us don't do the hard work of learning about it and speaking up about it and standing up for it when we see it happen. And this, by the way, isn't a generational thing. This is a human thing. Every adult in this room feels the temptation to hold back when it comes to injustice. And don't get me wrong, thinking about it is good. Praying is powerful. Posting is important. And all of that is good. But if us doing some good stops there, we have missed some of what it means to follow Jesus. You see, following somebody means you do the things that they would do. And Jesus was always doing some good in the face of the injustice that took place around him. And maybe you've heard about how Jesus spoke up for the poor, and he cared for the sick, and he hung out with the people who were the outcasts and confronted the leaders who were treating them unfairly. And did Jesus offer his words? Well, absolutely, but he also offered his actions. He lived in a way that showed the people what it looks like to value people, and as his followers, we can do the same. Look at what James went on to say. In the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by actions, is dead. James was saying that our faith and our actions are connected, and if we say we have faith but it doesn't motivate us to do something, then something about our faith is incomplete or it's lacking. And here's why that's a big deal. Living a life of faith is about becoming more like Jesus. And even if you've missed every part of this series so far, here's the part I want you to remember. When it comes to injustice, Jesus was always doing some good. Always. When we make the shift to allow our prayers and our words to turn into action, we are becoming more and more like the person we are praying to. We are becoming more like Jesus. And the things that make you feel sad or angry that you know aren't right, the injustice that motivate you to act, those things that hurt you and the people you love, those are all wrongs in the world that God wants to see made right. And they are the bad we're calling to shift into good, and not just tossing in some good here or there or sprinkling some good over there so we can look back and go, that's pretty good enough. Well, we are called to more. Because good enough is never good enough, because justice never stops. There's no line or measuring cup that tells us that the good we're doing is now good enough. There's no a finish line to doing good. When it comes to justice, it's an ongoing effort, it's a lifelong commitment. It may feel overwhelming, like our little actions won't have any impact on such a giant problem, but small changes are still changes. And they good changes in the right direction. And now some of you get this because you've been doing some good things and the problems of injustice for a long time, and you've been speaking up for people, you've been showing up to help, and you've been posting and working, and because of that, here's what you know for sure: it's exhausting. Doing something means you have the same conversations over and over. It means you don't show up one time, check the box and move on. You show up over and over and over. And it may feel like it's not working. You may feel like you're fighting a losing battle, but every little thing you've done and you're doing just continues to add up. And you might feel discouraged at times, wondering if this battle is even ever going to be won. Well, if that's you, I want you to hear from somebody who met Jesus, who hung out with his followers, and including James, and who spoke to people who were facing huge injustice, and it was the Apostle Paul. And he comes on and he says this, he says, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have the opportunity, let us do good to all people. Don't get weary when you're doing good. Paul said, in other words, don't give up. Don't give up when the good work gets hard. Instead, keep going, keep working, and keep fighting. And Paul would know, because if you took a deep dive into his story, you would see that he used to be one of the most prejudiced and unjust people around. But after he encountered Jesus, Paul's life turned upside down, and he committed to doing good. And see, the work you're doing and the injustices in the world that break your heart, they're not new. And that means that the battle between doing some good and injustices isn't new either. There are people who've been fighting to right wrongs and do good in the world for decades and centuries, and little by little there have been changes. There's been a progress, and I'm so grateful for those people who didn't give up. They didn't become weary in doing good. The same can be true for us. When it comes to injustices, never stop doing something good. It may feel impossible, but little by little you can change the world. How? Like James said, do something good. Like Paul said, keep doing something good, because good enough is never actually good enough, and justice never stops. So here are some ways that we can keep doing something good about injustice. The first is use your voice. Speak up. Say something in the moment. Say something on social media. Say something to a teacher or an adult who can help. Use your voice to speak up and speak out for those who need it. And if that doesn't work, keep saying something until it does. The second is use your influence. Maybe people listen to you because you're in their friendship group. Use that influence to talk about the injustices with them. Maybe your family has resources that could help another family. Maybe you could ask how you can use some of those. Maybe your family has the connections or lots of opportunities, and you can ask how you can use your opportunities to help someone else get more opportunities. The third is use your talent. You don't have to give up on football or drama or whatever your hobby is. Just use that talent God has given you to do some good for others. Lean into what you're good at to do some good. Maybe you're really good at art, so you could do something about injustice and you could see that in your school. Or maybe you could but the fact that you're part of a sports team, you could get the whole team to speak up and serve others. Right? Maybe there's ways in which we could ask God to show us some of the talents that we've got, and then ask the leaders around us about how we can use our talents to serve against injustice. The fourth is use your life. Because we're not talking about just one service project and just sign up and volunteer a few times. Injustice is everywhere, and part of following Jesus is making a commitment to do good and keep doing good. It's making a lifelong commitment to do the work. And of course that means you have to take care of yourself in the process. But you may need to find some people who can encourage you, who can remind you that doing something is worth it even when it feels hard. See, in the beginning, God created this world we live in, and He said that it was good. And this world does not always live up to the goodness of when God first created it, but each of us also is part of God's good creation, which means that we have the ability to infuse good back into the world when injustice creeps in and taints things. And maybe before this, you never thought God cared about injustice. And for some of us, the idea has even changed the way we even view God altogether. Because goodness flowed from God when God created the earth, and it was good. And goodness flowed from God when He created humans, and God called us good. And injustice is a big, bad issue that taints what we've seen, and it can feel impossible to overcome. But when we are called to do more than just good enough, it can start to change. And before we head into our groups, I want us just to pause for a moment today as we wrap up this series. I want you to actually imagine this for me. What if the church actually lived this out? Not just our church, but the church, the entire community of people who follow Jesus. How might people in your school or your town see God differently if Christians were known for choosing to see people the way God sees them and treat them as God would? It's not impossible when you begin to think and imagine that kind of future, because it's actually filled with possibility. And here's what's crazy: this can happen, but only if we do some good.